Elena Harper used to laugh easily. Before the accident, she was the kind of woman who sang along to the radio while driving, who texted "good morning" to her friends without needing a reason. But all that changed the night a drunk driver ran a red light, crushing her small car into a guardrail and taking her fiancé, Marcus, with it. After 6 months in the hospital and another 6 in therapy, she was technically recovered. But the mirror told another story. Scars traced her ribs, and deeper still were the ones no one could see. Anxiety attacks, insomnia, and the brutal ache of absence. Marcus had been her anchor, her compass. Without him, she felt adrift in a world that no longer felt like home. She left her job, her city, her friends. Moved to the quiet, salty-aired coast of Maine. She bought a small cottage on a bluff overlooking the sea. It was quiet, safe. She didn't plan on meeting anyone, especially not someone like Theo Marlowe. Theo was a former combat medic who had seen too much of war and too little of peace. He had come to this corner of Maine for the same reasons Elena had. Silence, solitude, survival. He worked at the local bookstore cafe, pouring espresso and recommending poetry to customers who barely listened. The first time Elena came in, she wore oversized sunglasses and a knitted scarf that covered her throat even in July. Theo noticed her hands trembled when she passed over a $20 bill. She left without waiting for her change. He didn't chase her. The second time he handed her a book, *The Year of Magical Thinking* by Joan Didion. "For when words matter," he said simply. She didn't say thank you, but she took the book. By the 5th visit, she was asking for tea recommendations. He gave her chamomile with honey. By the 10th, she told him about Marcus. Quietly, carefully. Theo didn't respond with platitudes. He nodded, listened, and when she was done he said, "I lost someone too. Afghanistan. He was like a brother." That was the day the ice began to thaw. Over the weeks that followed, they built something that wasn't quite friendship, not yet love, but something sturdy in between. Walks on the beach. Silent dinners. Watching gulls and not needing to speak. They didn't touch, not yet. It was too soon for both of them. But they shared their nights in separate houses, knowing the other was close, emotionally if not physically. One rainy evening, Theo invited her to an open mic night he hosted at the bookstore. Elena almost said no. Crowds still made her skin prickle. But she went. For him. He read a poem of his own, something raw and uneven, about holding grief like a cup of water, sometimes sipping from it, sometimes drowning in it. She cried not because it hurt but because it felt honest. Later, they stood in the rain beneath a single shared umbrella. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I," he said. "But maybe we don't have to know. Maybe we just show up." She kissed him then, softly, a question. His answer was a hand on her cheek, steady and sure. Love after trauma isn't like the love in the movies. It isn't fast or perfect or easy. Slow. It's full of pauses and relapses. Elena still flinched at loud sounds. Theo still woke in the middle of the night, gasping. But they learned the rhythms of each other's pain. He'd brew her tea when her hands shook. She would sit with him through his silences, her presence louder than words. One day, she took off her scarf and let the sun hit her scars. "I used to be ashamed," she said. "They're part of your story," Theo replied. "And I want to know all of it." They traveled just short weekend trips. Boston, Vermont, the mountains, the sea. They danced in kitchens and fell asleep on sofas. She showed him pictures of Marcus. He showed her an old, crumpled letter from his friend, now framed by his bedside. They honored their ghosts, but didn't let them haunt. 2 years later, Theo asked Elena to marry him on the bluff where she had once stood alone, wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. He didn't kneel. She didn't expect it. He simply looked at her and said, "I want to grow old beside someone who knows what it's like to break and still believes in mending." She said yes. Their wedding was small, just a handful of friends, the wind and the sea. There were no fairy tale endings, no magic spells to erase the past. But there was love, resilient, quiet, and real. Love that had learned to hold grief and joy in the same hand. And in the end, that was enough. Married life for Elena and Theo wasn't a smooth road. It was more like a forest path, winding and shaded, sometimes muddy, sometimes brilliant with wildflowers. There were no grand declarations, no social media-worthy perfection. Just morning coffee on the porch, reading side by side in silence, and knowing that silence didn't mean absence anymore. They still had their separate wounds. Theo had nightmares. The kind that left sweat-soaked sheets and a faraway look in his eyes during breakfast. Elena would simply reach across the table, her hand warm against his. No questions, just presence. Elena had panic attacks, especially in traffic. One afternoon, a truck backfired while they were driving, and she curled in on herself, shaking. Theo pulled over and turned off the engine. He didn't say, "You're okay." He said, "We'll sit here until the fear passes. I've got you." They never tried to fix each other. That was the miracle of their love. One windy October afternoon, Elena found a box in the attic. Old letters from Marcus. She hadn't opened it in over 3 years. She carried the box to the living room and stared at it for hours. When Theo came home, he sat beside her. "Do you want me to go?" he asked gently. "No," she whispered. "I want you to stay." She opened the box. There were notes scribbled in the margins of books, birthday cards with his terrible doodles, the kind of letters people write when they think forever is a guarantee. Reading them didn't rip her open. Instead, it felt like putting a lost puzzle piece back where it belonged, not to complete the picture but to honor it. Afterwards, she burned the letters in the fire pit out back. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she wanted to let go. Theo held her the entire time. They tried for a baby. At first, it was a shared dream, soft and gentle, like a sunrise they hoped to walk toward together. But month after month, the dream stretched thinner. After a year, tests showed that Elena's body, scarred from the accident, might never carry a child safely. She cried in the shower. Theo sat outside the door and read to her through the sound of falling water. They grieved in silence at first. Then they talked about adoption, about foster care, about whether they needed to parent at all to be a family. "We could pour our love into something else," Theo said. "A garden, a mentorship, a home that's safe for someone who never had one." Elena looked at him then and knew. This was what love after trauma looked like. Not perfection but promise. Not ease but endurance. They applied to be foster parents a few months later. A 7-year-old girl named Sophie needed emergency placement. She had been through 3 homes already. She didn't talk. She bit her fingernails down to the skin. She didn't make eye contact. Elena said yes before the call ended. She saw something familiar in the girl's silence, something raw and wary and aching for safety. Sophie didn't speak for weeks. She flinched at raised voices. She hoarded food under her bed. Elena didn't push. Theo taught her how to garden instead. In the spring, Sophie planted a sunflower, and the first word she spoke was yellow. It was a beginning. Years passed, quiet and golden. Sophie became theirs, officially adopted on a sunlit morning where she wore a yellow dress and called Elena Mama for the first time. Theo cried openly in court. Elena published a memoir, not about the accident but about healing, grief, and the strange, sacred act of rebuilding a heart. Theo started a small non-profit helping veterans through writing therapy. At night, he still read poetry to Elena, and now to Sophie too, whose laughter had become the music of their house. They never stopped missing the people they lost. But love had become the thing that made their memory beautiful, not unbearable. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the bluff where Theo had proposed. Sophie ran ahead, laughing, her sunflower hair bouncing in the wind. Elena turned to Theo and said, "If you had told me all those years ago that the shattered pieces could become something this whole, I wouldn't have believed you," he finished. They stood in silence, not because they lacked words, but because they no longer needed them. Elena had once believed she was too broken to love again. That grief had taken all her capacity. But standing there, hand in hand with a man who had taught her how to breathe again, and watching the daughter they had fought for dance beneath the sky. She finally understood. The light always finds its way in through the cracks.